Seattle King County Clinic is an annual free clinic that is hosted by Seattle Center. It began a few years ago as an initiative to help provide health care to some of Seattle's underserved populations. The clinic offers an abundance of services. Many have grown over the years, and some of which have grown are dental, eye, and foot care
Dental
services.
services offer free cleaning, root canals, crownings, teeth removals, and some simple cosmetic while procedures. Eye care offers free screening exams and free corrective lenses. Foot cares offer exams and then treatment of some of the common. All equipment are donated or supplied by many of the local and national sponsors. All providers and caregivers are volunteers. While normal physical operations of the clinic only last for 4 days throughout the year, the actual planning and facilitating of the clinic is managed by 4 people all year. The purpose of this practicum experience was to increase the number of dentists, optometrists, and podiatrists that volunteered at the Seattle King County Clinic from West Seattle neighborhood. In effort to meet the growing demand of services, the clinic planners and developers wanted to increase the number of special providers that provided these particular services to the clinic. I chose to look at West Seattle neighborhood because it's the area where I live and is one that I'm very familiar with. In the proximity of West Seattle is particularly very close to the city. It's very populated, and it also gives you an opportunity to see some of the type of providers that come from West Seattle. Next slide. This project was designed in 4 different stages. The first stage was the meet and greet stage. This stage, this is when I did all of the scouting using Google Maps for which providers were all closest to me versus the ones that were furthest away from me. This is also how I went about planning how exactly I was going to get to these providers. Rather, it was going to be a day where I walked around my neighborhood or I used public transportation to get to the outer regions of West Seattle, or I just simply used my own personal vehicle. The next step of stage 1 was the planning. During this stage, this is when I decided exactly what materials that I needed so that I knew exactly what I wanted to ask for from the clinic. I also used this time to kind of research exactly how I was going to engage with the providers and kind of pretty much sell volunteering to them for the clinic. I am very much aware of the busy schedules that these providers have and definitely wanted to make sure that volunteering was something that truly appealed to them. Meeting the providers had its challenges in itself. Many of the providers were very busy when I walked into the offices and was unable to meet with me. The providers that I did get to meet in person were my own personal providers that I've seen in the past or that I know from professionally through work. So a lot of the providers, or at least the majority of them rather, I interacted with them through email. However, I did not receive many responses through email, and so it presented some of its own challenges. For stages 2 and 3, this is what I considered playing the field. This was my follow-up interactions with all of the providers, which means this is when all providers were contacted electronically and they were sent multiple flyers to remind them that the clinic was happening and to solicit their help as volunteers in the clinic. During these 2 stages, I was hoping to receive a lot more feedback from the providers as to who was going to volunteer at the clinic. One article that I read in particular that was named Why Do They Care really discussed how physicians are more likely to volunteer when it's discussed amongst themselves. Or for instance, when one provider goes and volunteers and then comes back and explains the joy or the satisfaction that they receive for volunteering, and it really promotes other physicians to wanting to volunteer. This is the reason why I sent multiple flyers to one clinic, the West Seattle Swedish Medical Clinic. This clinic had and gave me the opportunity to really reach out to a array of providers at one time, and hopefully that these, and my hope was that these providers actually camaradered together and discuss volunteering, and that they would sign up to be volunteers at the clinic. The next slide provided an array of demographics for all the providers. Here on this slide, you can see the providers by gender. You can see the providers by race. You can see the providers by their age group, by years of experience, and also by specialty. The next slide displays my accomplishments throughout this whole practicum experience. As you can see, I was able to obtain 6 out of the 20 providers who actually commit to volunteering at the clinic. The 6 out of the 20 providers that actually have committed were all of the 6 people that I was able to meet with in person. Several inferences can be drawn from these results. The first being that all of the providers responded best when spoken to in person. Second being that email is not the best way to communicate with providers when trying to promote them to volunteer. I'm not sure if there was complications with firewalls that was blocking my emails from getting through, or that because they were going to a generic office email that they were being ignored. However, I do know that I did not receive any responses from the providers that I emailed. However, the practicum project was cut short due to the outbreak of COVID-19. Unfortunately, the results were cut short by nearly a month when everything had to pretty much come to a screeching halt once Governor Inslee, the governor of Washington, placed a stay-at-home order and the clinic was canceled. In the next slide, titled Years of Barriers, completing this practicum project was a challenge from the very beginning. At the same time COVID-19 was brewing across the world, here in Seattle, we were preparing for a labor union strike where 9,000 caregivers did not report to work for 3 days. Because so much time was lost in preparation of the strike, this is when I actually opted into emailing as many of the providers that I had planned to meet with in person, or at least try to attempt to. It's also important to know, at the same time, many public health officials were actually trying to contact as many travelers as they possibly can to direct them back to United States in preparation for the pandemic that was occurring. During the same time frame was when Seattle got their first case of a positive COVID-19 patient from the Life Care Center in Kirkland. Then shortly after that, there were multiple cases that came from the same nursing facility where the majority, or if not all of those patients, were admitted to the hospital where they later died. As the number of infected persons began to climb rapidly here in the Seattle area, many of the large companies, colleges, universities, schools began to close, and this was way before our governor actually gave the stay-at-home order. Right after the stay-at-home order was when the Seattle Center decided that the clinic for this year was actually going to be canceled. The King County Clinic was placed on hold until the governor ordered the stay-at-home order for the state of Washington. Once the stay-at-home order was in place, the county pretty much canceled all large gatherings for people, which would have included the Seattle King County Clinic. So at that time, all planning and preparations for the clinic had to be halted for the remainder of the year. On the next slide, we'll be able to discuss recommendations. My first recommendation is to visit more providers in person. Visiting providers in person gives me the opportunity to have face-to-face interaction as well as the interpersonal engagement. In closing, this practicum experience really gave me the opportunity to gain understanding of the marketing, recruiting, and promotion that it takes to gather the attention of the targeted audience. And for me, that was the providers. Secondly, I would like to contact more providers. Contacting more providers would have increased the awareness of the clinic and provided more opportunities for additional providers to actually volunteer at the clinic. In closing, this experience gave me the opportunity to gain understanding of the marketing, recruiting, and promoting it takes to gather the attention of the targeted audience. I sincerely wish I had more time and resources to reach more providers well beyond the borders of West Seattle. All in all, this was an eye-opening experiment. Until 2021, be safe, be well.